Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
Coming up on The Payoff, Rob Koebel was an Emmy Award-winning investigative reporter, and then his life completely imploded. It imploded because his ex-wife had written a book about being in a relationship with an abusive spouse or an abusive partner. Turns out that partner was Rob. Rob was this person when he was in his addiction, and when the book came out, he spiraled. She made an appearance on the Dr. Drew show. This woman is a well-known CNN anchor. We get into all this, and we get into how Rob battled back from basically the consequences that he was dealt as a result of his alcoholism and how he found a way. He said something that really stuck with me at the start of or at the end of this podcast. He said, it's not so much, and I think he was quoting Brad Pitt or Anthony Hopkins. He said, it's not so much the mistake, because people love to focus on the mistake. It's the next move, right? What's the next move people make? Rob has been full of next moves in his sobriety, and he's somebody who I had heard about him because it was a pretty big deal when he got arrested urinating outside of an Apple store in Milwaukee. It's all in the podcast. It was on tape, part of it, and he was an esteemed newsman in Milwaukee, so obviously, as you can imagine, this made some headlines, and hopefully this podcast will too. At the very least, we hope it helps somebody. Speaking of helping somebody, come on, let's get a little help right now from my main man, Kevin Souza.
Hello.
Rob.
Hey, Pete. How you doing?
What's up, man? How are you?
I'm doing fine, sir. Thanks for asking.
You got it. Are you in Southern California today? Where are you at?
I am in Los Angeles. Yes, sir. You're in Texas, right?
I am in Texas, coming to you from Texas. We have, by the way, we've crossed paths a lot. We've been circling each other for a while, yeah, it's pretty interesting.
It's very cool. We've been to some pretty cool places, huh?
Yeah, so I'm super pumped. One of the people who I've had on here is Courtney Friel, and
sure.
I had known about you for a long time, right? Because of your story. We're going to get into that in a couple moments, and talk about pretty much what it was like, what happened, what it's like now. But I'm just going to interview you through the whole thing because I'm so interested in your story and stories like these, stories of recovery that start off, they kind of all start off at the same place, at the bottom, whatever your particular bottom is. So anyways, I listened to Courtney's podcast and I heard you on there. I saw you on there, and then I was like, oh my gosh. And it's so cool to see you doing so well.
Well, thanks, man. And you as well. I mean, I think you have like 12 years now?
Well, 10 years, 10 years. Yeah.
10 years?
And you're 10 years too, right?
Coming up on it. Yep. September 22nd, 2012. So yeah, good for you. I mean, dude, congratulations, because it's no easy feat. And listen, you've taken life, by the horns too, by the bull horns, and found a new, purpose and passion, throughout, and are chasing that. I think that's the secret success to recovery.
Do you think finding like a passion almost on the other side of it, aside from you're a 12-step guy from what I've read and listened to, right? Pretty much.
Yes, I am. I will talk, because I think I listened to some of yours with Courtney too. Is I refer to it as AA, and I do as with utmost respect for Alcoholics Anonymous, and I don't reveal anybody else's anonymity or anything, but there's a reason I do that, because I believe there's so much value in that program, and maybe combine it with something else, but to not mention it, I think does a disservice. And a lot of critics will say, well, when you mention that and you go back out and you relapse and everybody says it doesn't work. And I'll say this to that, Pete, is that I have a lot of friends that have died from cancer. They were treated with chemo and radiation. We never blamed the treatment. We blamed the disease. It's the same thing.
It truly is. And I was going to tee you up to have you say that, because I've heard you say that before, and I love it. I love it. Come on, you're a journalist. You've done this before. I was ready to tee you up, pal. So let's start.
Well,
go ahead.
I love what you guys were doing, and really congratulations. I mean, it's hard, and you didn't have to necessarily. I looked up your brother and stuff too, so I see that you've had that running through the family and everything, but you didn't have to come forward, dude. So I give you a lot of credit, because I would say it helps a lot of people, and sometimes it may hurt us, but we do it because we do care.
Well, it's a passion, and you have the same passion. I see you, working in recovery now, kind of weaving it throughout your entire life. And, I didn't have to do it. You kind of did. And here's why, for people that don't know. Rob, Emmy-winning journalist, investigative reporter in Milwaukee, when it hit the fan. And it's such an interesting story, because I think everybody looks at the big unraveling. You end up taking a piss on the Apple Store in Milwaukee, and that's the culmination of a 6-month run. What happens? What's the prelude to that? Because you're on tape, everybody hears about it. I remember reading about it. You're on national news, you're on local news, you're an investigative reporter. So, this happens to you. People are gonna come for you, because you've been coming for them.
Yeah, and boy, did I give them plenty of ammunition, to do that. And you work in the news business, and you're an investigative reporter. You don't make a lot of friends, and they look for anything where there's a weakness, a chink in the armor. And certainly drugs and alcohol have always, throughout my life, have been that way. And really what led up to the binge, the 3-day binge at the end, was my ex-wife is a CNN news anchor. Her name is Christy Paul. She released a book that talks all about her.
Hey, Rob, you're sounding a little muffled now.
Is it any better?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, is that better? Okay, sorry. Let me make sure that this is up as high as it goes.
Man, there you go.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
And
so your ex-wife is a CNN news anchor, Christy Paul, but she's, I guess, at the time of this all happens, she's on HLN, right?
Yes.
Okay. And go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No. So she writes a book, and it's about being in a verbally abusive relationship, and you find out about this, and what happens?
Well, I mean, what happens is the guilt and the shame, all the issues that I hadn't dealt with in the 12 years that we had been divorced, come back. I felt horrible about things that we had gone through, the struggles that we had done. We had no contact or communication. There wasn't really any reason to. And she wrote the book, went through some of our counseling sessions, talked about our lives. Some of it's true, some of it's not, released a country music song. And as she promoted that book, it was extremely difficult for me. And I had no tools to work through that, process, except for what I've known all my life at that point was, drugs or alcohol.
Yeah. And you get an inkling that this is going down. And then you go on like a 6-month run. Because, dude, I can't imagine what that would be like. I mean, if a woman that I dated, let alone married, were to write a book about me when I was in my addiction, and the back and forth, right, and the ebbs and flows of our relationship, I wouldn't have known what to do. I can't imagine what the heck that's like. What is that like?
Sometimes when I talk to both male and female, and they hear the story, their faces just really go blank, and you see the fear, and then they share with you. They're like, "Oh my God, if that happened in one of my relationships, things I regret saying or doing, and somebody put that out there, I would be devastated."
Yeah.
So I think we all at one point in time can relate to, the pain there. And again, it does not condone my drinking or anything that Christy and I went through. In fact, it tears in my heart, because I loved her very much, and we both, when we were married, were struggling with understanding addiction. Well, she's got it on her side of the family. I have it on my side of the family. It runs through there. But we would go to doctors, and, Pete, they'd be like, okay, well, Rob, we'll put you on Prozac. This will help. I mean, we were just lost, and we didn't want anybody to know about it. I mean, specifically, I didn't want to. You'd have to ask Christy, herself whether, I think obviously she wanted to keep it too, but, people knew and, saw me out, or they knew, obviously I enjoyed to drink and blow off steam that way. But, AA just wasn't, other opportunities weren't part of the option at that time. And, it's too bad.
Well, I tell people I got the gift of desperation, dude. And literally that's what happened for me. I didn't, I leveraged every last thing I had against getting sober. I used to say, I leveraged everything I had, and then I ran out of nickels, dude. I ran out of money, like I had nothing left.
Sure.
And it's true. And then, so you find yourself now, you're on this run. When you find out about the book, you get an advance copy of it. And this is a time, by the way, and I'm familiar with this just because I was kind of dialed into the whole scene. Everybody on the HLN network is kind of doing their own thing. Like Nancy Grace is writing a book about what's going on with her. And there's a couple other people who are writing books, just kind of putting it out there, which is all good, right? It's all their things about their experiences in life. But so then your ex-wife writes one, and you're the primary focus, and she ends up on Dr. Drew.
Right.
On HLN, talking about her story. And just take us through that night.
Well, I mean, she ended up on Dr. Drew. She ended up on other HLN shows, as well, too. And you are right. There are a lot of people at that time following her. Robin Mead is her best friend, was in our wedding. Robin wrote a book about how she...
Morning Express.
What's that?
The Morning Express, right? Robin Mead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, as you know, it's a small, business. And Robin, wrote about how she, found her way through panic attacks when she was working as a news anchor in Chicago, and the things that she had to go through. And listen, I think there's probably pressure to maybe write a book or do those things. You'd have to ask Christy, the rest of, why she do that. But, when it goes, Dr. Drew was probably right about toward the end of when I just couldn't handle it. And I had a lawyer. We had really been clear to CNN that you better be careful with the information here. From what I've seen, some things are factual, other things are not. You've never reached out to us. What is going on? What is the purpose of this? And so it was a few months later. I thought it was pretty much gone away, and then I got a text that there was a promo for it. So I went home that night and I watched it, and of course I drank. And it was extremely painful because for the first time in her interviews that I heard ironically what I needed to hear, probably a long distance intervention that was pointing to really the root cause of all of it, addiction. And I couldn't hear it at the time. I was just angry and mad. And I just, I couldn't hear it. But when I go back and I think about it and I hear what Dr. Drew said, is he said, he interrupted Christy and said, wait a second here. Everything that you're saying is, the guy's an alcoholic, and I feel bad for him.
And at this time, nobody knows who the guy is, quote unquote. I mean, but people can figure it out, right?
Yeah, and there were some writings about it here and there in some of our trade things, TV Spy or whatever. There were some here and there, and I was getting hate mail and getting some stuff. But it wouldn't come until the night of the Apple Store, where I gave the media, who, I learned later were doing, background stories and preparing things, that I gave them every reason to go ahead and write, publish, broadcast those stories, because now that person, you could see the verbally abusive, person that Christy, describes in her book.
And you literally see it. I mean, it's on tape, outside the Apple Store. So what happens leading up to that?
Leading up to the Apple Store is I just ran out of booze at home. In Milwaukee, they don't sell anymore. I lived in a place that has a steakhouse. There was everything you could walk to, Trader Joe's, but they don't sell it. But there was a bar there, Bar Louie, and I figured I just need to get a few drinks, have a couple drinks, go to bed, pass out, and I'll survive again for tomorrow. But when I got there, I was so I guess I don't drink about my problems, I drank at them.
Yeah.
And that night I started with, I think was like 2 Jaeger bombers, 3 glasses or 4 glasses of wine, a couple more Jaeger shots. And then I figured, well, that'll be enough to get me home.
And hey, hold on. You're the news guy. Anybody notice the news guy getting completely wasted?
It's a great question. I tipped well. They knew me there, but they did know, Pete, that there was something wrong. And the bartender, I remember she saying like, "Are you okay, Rob, tonight?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And I'm just in my own. And I did call a friend of mine who, lived below me a couple floors, and he's like, "Stay there. You don't need to be there. I'll come up and get you. And, we'll just walk back. This is only 500 feet." And I figured I had it all planned, no driving, no nothing, just use my finger, hit the elevator, and I'll pass out. And then
that's the only operation is the fingers in the elevator, right?
Yeah, and I couldn't do that. I mean, I couldn't even run, to try to get into my place to avoid, what started first as the security guards and then the real police.
And then the real police show up and it's all caught on camera. I mean, it's a wild scene. And, you're mouthing off to the police. It's stuff that drunk people do when they have drinking problems and they're out in public. It's nothing. You go to a 12-step meeting, an AA meeting, you hear that. You're going to hear stories like that, which is good because, one, it's people sharing their experience, strength, and hope and putting it out there for other people to identify with. That's why it's important that a guy like you is able to tell this story today. Nobody was, look, man, I mean, people were hurt, right? I'm sure your family was hurt, but and people close to you from this being so public, but nobody was hurt, and your life got completely shot in the right direction because of it. What happens that, you get arrested for drunk and disorderly, I guess, right?
Yeah, it was disorderly conduct and what was the other one? I think it was resisting arrest. So they took me in and they booked me, and that's where they had a booking video, and I should have known that, for crying out loud, and recorded all of it, and that's really where it showed me mouthing off to the cops. And you had, video evidence of it. I could see myself later on, when I was sober, to see, what drugs and alcohol did to me. So at that point, they're like, "Hey, we're going to book you, let you go, release you to your friend. And, you'll face the rest of this stuff." If I would have shut up and exercised my right to remain silent, I would have been in and out of there a lot faster than the 52 minutes that, I aggravated the cops and was a true asshole.
Well, you were an alcoholic. Let's be real. I mean, we do have consequences for our actions, right? But you were drunk and being a complete jerk, and you end up all over the place. I mean, what is that next morning like?
Well, the next morning was brutal because I woke up and my throat was really, really dry. At this point, there's so much drinking, I was dehydrated that I was sort of used to that, but it was really painful. I could hardly swallow. And I got up, it was just going to be another day to go to work. I'm probably not going to be feeling so great when I go in there. And I go into the bathroom and I look in the mirror and I see some cuts on my face. And then it starts coming back to me. I'm like, wait a second. And my body hurt. And I'm like, uh-oh, this was not. And then it started coming back to me. Now that I remember that arguing with the police officers, putting my phone back in my pocket, they went to cuff me. We fell over onto the ground, and that's why I'm sore. And then I immediately called my friend below, and I'm like, "I'm screwed. It's over." And he's like, calm down. Everything's going to be okay. We've got to talk about this. And, I went into work with that, fear of like, what's going on. And then, people would ask, "Hey, what happened? What happened? You cut your face? What happened?"
How long till everybody found out about it? How long are you waiting for the other shoe to drop?
It was like 3 weeks, man. That was hard. Like 3 weeks.
Are you drinking that whole time?
Yeah, I had cut back a little bit, but I remember being at the doctor, and as that far along in my drinking career, you have high blood pressure, hypertension, you've gained the weight, you're unhealthy, and the doctor was lecturing me right when the station called, and I knew at that point, and it was my big boss calling, and I listened to the message, and the doctor's like, "What's going on? Why aren't you listening?" And I said, "I got other things to think about." And when I went into addiction, they wanted to sit down and talk to me. And, at that point, I knew. They were aware that Christie's book, had come out. I had talked to them about that. I'd shared, that it was difficult. And we thought we were sort of through the whole thing, and it wasn't. It was far from it.
Well, so was there a relief that you felt when you got there, or would you ended up resigning? And after that, do you go right to treatment? What happens next? And what's that encounter like? Take us in there with your executives, your boss. Was your news director in there, I guess, and maybe HR?
Oh yeah. So I worked in Milwaukee, so that is also where, for Journal Broadcast Group, that is also where the corporate headquarters are, right? So
what's the broadcast group?
It was Journal Broadcast Group at the time.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
So, and that's their headquarters. That was the flagship station. I had been promoted from Fort Myers. So if you couldn't find any other big head, newswig, head person in that town, I did. So when I came in, I went to in my boss's office, and it was a heartfelt meeting in a sense that they're like, what he talked to me, and I really looked up to him. They gave me all these great opportunities, built the investigative unit around me, and he's like, what happened? And I started telling him, and he's like, and you thought this was never going to come public? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you? We could try to help you.
Yeah.
And he said, I gave you everything. I gave you the keys to this station, and this is what happened. And I said, I'm sorry. And he said, I'm not sure you really are. And he was just mad.
Sure.
And he wanted to try to help and figure it out. He's like, just go back to your office, work on the story you're doing right now, and I'll talk to you later. But, I'm old enough and wise enough in some aspects. I went back to my desk, and I'm like, well, if this were a fire drill, what would you take if you ain't ever coming back?
Yeah.
Because, I'm like, okay, this is just when external hard drives were coming out. I'm like, better grab that, better grab this, better take that thing, get the University of Florida Gator, flag right there, because this is probably it. So then I get a phone call sitting at my desk, and he's like, why don't you just work from home? And I'm like, okay. And so I grabbed the stuff, and that would be the last time that I would be in the station. But then it got really tough because, and I put my coworkers, I put our legal counsel in a really unfortunate position, because they didn't want to have to report that story, and then as news ethics and judgment come in there, it's not a story that I need to be involved in, right? Maybe for a response, but I knew nothing. And in this business, you've been around long enough that I was sitting at home, and I had a text from one of the producers. Is like, what's going on with you? Call me. And I just let it go. And he's like, why are you in my show?
Oh, yeah.
And then I start noticing, like, social media, the station accounts, they're disappearing, right? With my face and profiles or whatever it is. And I had talked to a good friend during this time, and I watched them, at home, air the story of what happened. And I felt bad for the main anchor, and I felt bad for the writers. I felt bad for my bosses. They had a job to do, and they had to do it. And it didn't bring them any pleasure.
Yeah.
And so that was something that, again, talk about the wreckage of the past, that was really hard. Yes, extremely hard for me to watch, extremely hard. My friend was with me, to hear that, he was arrested urinating on the Apple Store. This came right after a Green Bay Packers game. So the ratings were high. The eyes were all on there. I found out later they were talking about it, so it was now out. And I had to think about what my next move was. And
this is September of 2012.
Yep, 2012.
So what is your next move?
Well, the next move is, after talking a couple of times, is I had to, I felt I had to resign. I should have, in hindsight, it really put me in a tough position. I had no medical insurance then. I would have, none of those type things instead of asking. Later on, I had talked to our legal counsel, and she's like, we didn't know what we were going to do with you. And then you resigned. And so the next day, I typed an email and left a message, and I got a call from the assistant to my boss. He's like, he'd really like to just meet you. And we met at a Starbucks parking lot, and it was a beautiful Milwaukee day, sunny. It was actually warm. I brought my cell phone, my badge, and he sat down and he talked, and he said, I'm heartbroken. Is this all because of Christy, or whatever? And he just shook his head, and he's like, it's heartbreaking. And that was the end. And listen, Christy may have been a catalyst, but I can't blame everything on that. They could have pushed me over the edge, but the true evil was the booze and and drugs.
Hey, they like him or not, Dr. Drew had it right. Yeah, and that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you talk to somebody who's familiar with alcoholism and they're sharing something with you, a person is, or about a abusive relationship, verbal, whatever, and you're talking about a person who's taking a lot of alcohol or substance, it's clear that that's the issue. And guess what? If somebody is an alcoholic and they're sober and they're not filling that void with what they need to fill it with, they can be the same way. And that's the issue for us. Getting sober is incredible, but you've still got to fill that hole. And you've got to learn how to cope with all these things that used to happen. And that we would drink over. Before we get into your recovery, I want to go back. You remind me a lot of myself when I hear your story. You grow up, you start to drink, and you said something that resonates with me. It gives you the ability to talk to girls. It gives you that confidence.
I mean, it did. I mean, early on, I think that booze, it works so well until it doesn't work anymore. And for me, I was always shy. It was hard for me to ask women out. I mean, Christy and I's first kiss is no shocker that she was in the car with me visiting me and my parents in Ann Arbor, and we were coming home from a bar, and we got pulled over, and the guy wanted me to come out. It was actually on my birthday. He wanted me to do a field sobriety test.
Like a DUI checkpoint?
At a DUI checkpoint. He had pulled me over. He was going the opposite way. I was speeding, and we were out on my birthday, and we hadn't started really fully dating yet. And the cop walks up to the window, and he's like, "Have you been drinking?" Remember, this is back in the days where you had a stamp, on your hand, and you had whatever that
from
you
the
were
bar.
Of age. Yeah, from a bar. And I said no, and then Christy says he's only had a couple, and I'm like, oh, she doesn't know. You don't say that. And so he's like, "Can you step out of the car?" And it was 22 degrees and a wind chill out there. It was horrible. And he's like, "I think you've been drinking. I'd like you to do some field sobriety tests, but you don't have to." So I'm like, "Oh, great. Then I'll pass." And he's like, "Okay, then I arrest you." And I'm like, "Oh." So at this stage, I did the field sobriety test. I passed. The guy goes, "Do you have any questions?" And I said, "Well, I was speeding. You to give me a ticket?" And he's like, "Nope, that's not what I'm looking for tonight." So I go back into the car, and the cherries, the red and blue lights are still popping behind us. And I lean forward. Christy's like, "What happened?" I'm like, it's all fine. And I said, "I've been waiting to do this for a while." And I kissed her. What a romantic, if that isn't foreshadowing of hey, maybe there's a problem here.
Yeah. With the berries and cherries in the background, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what a great first kiss, right? Jeez, oh, geez. I look back now, half my life later, 25, 26 years later, and I cringe,
Yeah.
I feel for it, but we were young, we were young.
And that relationship, does it move quickly? Is there a lot of drinking involved? You meet her in West Virginia, where you're both working at, an entry-level station, into the business. Was there a lot of drinking and partying around those days of your life?
Sure. I mean, there was no secret that for me, that was my first job out of the University of Florida. And for Christy, she'd been trying for quite a while to get into news, but wasn't able to. So she was working at the convention center in Cleveland. So this was her first news job. We're all there in a town that we really don't know. And I'm continuing, enjoying partying with Christy and, our coworkers as well too. So that was never, I don't think there was ever a secret in that. And I think she's written to say that, it was something I thought, he would grow out of. But as you and I both know, if you're an alcoholic, you're not growing out of anything.
Yeah, it's funny. And you'll be in relationships with people, and people listening to this might be going through this themselves. Somebody who isn't an alcoholic, you're dating somebody with the drinking issue, and it's like, oh, well, they'll, the honeymoon phase is over. Maybe he'll stop drinking. We'll stop going out every night. That's not how it works for an alcoholic. There's no slowing down.
No. And we were saying earlier, it works so well until it doesn't work anymore. And here's the other flip side is, I think you're always the funniest person to everybody else but your significant other when you're drinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So, people saw that, and when Christy and I moved to Boise, I got a job in Boise, and
And you moved, by the way, you moved to Boise before it was cool to be in Boise. I mean, you planted the flag there. I've spent a lot of time in Boise, and now it's like they don't want anybody else to know how cool it is now. When you were there, it was just a really cold place, and it was kind of an up and coming city, I guess.
It's such a freaking cool city. Still is. Blue turf, Boise State University. I know you follow all. And Christy and I mean, it was such a great place. And the station, they had, back then, this was 95, 96, it would have been 96. We started nonlinear editing, it was amazing, all the tools and everything. So it was the best station to go to. It was a great place to be. But there were some challenges. I was young. The boss I had was really vindictive, and it took tolls. And again, I'm using alcohol. I wanted Christy to have a good life. We were getting married. I felt the pressure of all that, and I couldn't talk to her about any of those things, right? You know? And she would ask, and we didn't have the communication. I felt I couldn't share those fears with her, even though we ended up working together there as well. And she saw some of the abuse that I was taking from the people at the station, but I didn't share that necessarily.
Breaking the seal and finding your ability to go through those layers is hard enough when you're young, but when you're drunk, on top of it, you're an alcoholic. So you're just not developing any kind of skills as far as interpersonal communication and the ability to be vulnerable. There's none of that. That's what I experienced. I had none of that because anytime anything stressful came along, I was going to get drunk, and I wanted people to think that I was a quote unquote man. So I wasn't going to talk about it because that's not what we did.
Yeah. And Pete, that's really good. And it makes me think, looking back now on so many years ago, that sometimes I would come back and say, in fear that she would be leaving me, you're just going to leave me like the rest of them, or whatever it would be.
Yeah.
It was also, for me, I look at it as a way of defense. As she was trying to help me. She was trying to get me to communicate, and I didn't know how to. And that any closer that she got to me, I pushed back even further. And I see that now, in my recovery, that still I'm mindful of, trusting people and doing those things. So, I look back and, I hadn't really thought of it like that. She tried to communicate, and I couldn't.
And you're from a pretty good family, a great family, right? You're from, Are you from Ann Arbor?
Not originally. Grosse Pointe was originally where Grosse Pointe, Michigan was originally a lot of the family. And then we moved around a lot. We moved out here to L.A. or outside of L.A. And then, we lived in New Jersey, and close-knit family, similar to, to Christie's as well. And it just is a perfect example of, and a good childhood, perfect example of just what booze and drugs doesn't discriminate. It just, that's, I think you're, similar background.
Yeah.
It's just at one point in time, all I can say is that I found this magic elixir that allowed me the opportunity to ask women out, to be, charming, to smile, or, try to go and, have that first kiss, because all that anxiety for me, I couldn't do on my own.
Yeah. And the drinking just continues, right? Like through all that, which is, so you keep needing, you need to drink to do that again. There's a first kiss with this woman, and now we got to drink before the first kiss with the next woman. It's just, for me, it was that vicious cycle. Now she writes this book, and it talks about, this is, I don't know how many years after when the book comes out, but it talks about the relationship that we're talking about now. And she talks about the verbal abuse. What was like the worst thing in there that really, that got you like, whoa, like just kicked you in the nuts?
Well, she wrote the book 12 years later, and obviously that gives you an indication, of some of the work that she had to go through, right? So when we got divorced and she left me and we got divorced, I left her with a ton of stuff to shift through, and to work through on her own. Horrible feeling. I think that the biggest things, in the book, that the things that were correct, I think is the disappointment. I think is that, learning maybe 12 years later that, wait, she was really trying to help me. Why weren't we saying this? Or maybe I wasn't hearing it. Or, oh, that's right, she did stop drinking when I stopped to try to support me, but we never had a conversation about that.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't talk about, in marriage counseling, this is supposed to be a safe place to be, only to end up in a book later. I think that's difficult.
Yeah.
The days were, when I came home and I and I screamed at her. I now have to, look at the other side of what that was like, for her, and the things that I said and how hurtful they were to her, and all she really wanted to do was love me and show that, love is real, and the things, and I do believe that, but my mind was so diseased and sick at the time, I couldn't comprehend that. Why would she love me, right? Because there's no self-esteem.
Yeah, I've shared this before. I felt like, I outkicked the coverage when I was drinking with my significant others, and I'm certainly outkicking it now. And, with the woman I'm with now. But early on, I used booze and drugs as the way to build confidence. I would be like, I cannot be with this person. I cannot be with this person. Like, I'm not good enough. Now I use the program and reality and, like the things that the spirituality and the connection and the camaraderie we share in the rooms, that gives me the self-esteem now that alcohol and drugs used to give me. And it's such an interesting situation because I thought I was going to be lost without it. And it turns out that, to be as cliche as possible, I'm totally found, or I've found it.
And the happiness that comes with that, but it takes time.
Oh, dude, it does. It takes a while, like a long time, a long time. I did not have many successful relationships or in sobriety when I first started out. Cause you're just finding your footing. For you though, when you break up, and we're about to get into recovery, but I read this about you. This is like real epic breakup stuff because you break up, you get divorced, and then you still work at the same station with this woman.
A lot of people never mention that, but for the next 2.5 years, we worked together at 3TV in Phoenix, and I knew.
So you guys are both working at the same station in Phoenix.
Yep, and Christy at that time, she was still trying to be my friend. This isn't talked about a lot. She was, she always wanted to still be liked, and she wanted a friendship, and she would come over and stand over by my desk, like to start wanting, conversation or something, only to be met with a stream of swear words from me.
Yeah.
Which was not great, but I wanted to be clear as I wasn't looking for any kind of a friendship from her.
Yeah.
Nobody saw this.
Were you heartbroken?
Yeah, I was heartbroken. I was heartbroken, probably maybe, ego too. There you are
Sure.
now working in the newsroom. But one of the things that was so difficult is that we were, we had just, we were bidding. This is how quickly that happened. We were bidding on houses, talking about starting a family. And then, we have a fight, and Christy, finds a guy in Chicago that, she has met, via Robin, one of her friends. And while maybe nothing physical happens, that's the point where she goes, hey, there's something maybe better out there.
Uh-huh.
And I saw this happen, right? And, then as the divorce, it wasn't long, we were separated, the divorce started happening. I knew that I would have a front row seat to Christy getting remarried, buying a house, starting a family, and I would be there to see that. And I think that's an extremely hard thing to watch and be aware of. And then you're both two local people on TV, so that's the case, But again, I went out, I handled it with getting drunk, having other relationships, just making the continued wreckage, the arrest, the cops that took care of me because they felt bad for the situation. I mean, it was just,
it's crazy. Yeah. I mean, that's another thing too. You have, for somebody who, and this is the alcoholic, right? Like egomaniac with an inferiority complex, and you're also entitled. You talk about the fact that you keep having run-ins with the police, but you're not getting, you had consequences when you were younger. I guess you had a couple DUIs, which is a big deal for members of the human race, but not for active alcoholics.
No.
A couple of DUIs. Okay. But, this is all this stuff's happening. And then the roof caves in, right? With the incident in Milwaukee. And by the way, you're an Emmy-winning investigative reporter. Your work is impeccable, and well, it is, and it speaks for itself. And not to take anything away from people in the news industry today, but look, man, when you were humming, it was a really big deal to be a successful investigative journalist on a local level in a bigger city like Milwaukee. You are really an agent of change, and you were doing some great work, but then you lose it all. We'll get back to this conversation in a second, but right now, a word from our sponsors. Everything is lost, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, not just it was the career, it was everything. And you talk about the success, and thank you very much, but I'm an alcoholic. I don't see that, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know how I was doing or what was happening because I'm so insecure and such a mess that, nothing's never going to be enough. But yes, what you see in Milwaukee and what happens is somebody who loses everything but their life. And that was going to be the next step.
Oh yeah. I mean, for me, I'm very lucky that I hit bottom without dying, because I crawled into rehab and my whole life changed. You crawl into rehab and you had the longer term model too. You said you thought you were going for 28 days, but you ended up going for 90, right?
Yeah. And I heard that, you had a similar experience. Listen, this was right like when things were changing in treatment, where they really realized that 28 days is like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. You can stabilize somebody in that, right? Maybe. And that's vital, but nothing else. So my family had talked about it, and they're like, look, you need to stay for the 90 days and really take this seriously. Other than that, we're gone, and we'll love you. We'll pray for you, but that's it. And, I was always nice to the people there, but I was not happy about that situation. And I was extremely angry with Christy, and those resentments, could really, put me back out again.
So yeah, exactly. Right. You're not ready to go out into the open world because you're a guy that's packing heat with these resentments, and you're just like, I was the same way with some other stuff. Like I just wasn't ready. So where'd you go, by the way?
I went to I went down to Greensboro, North Carolina.
Okay.
It was in between, Florida, where my family is, and Charlotte. And so I went to Fellowship Hall there, and I found it online. I didn't even realize it was a not-for-profit, and it was a good place. And they started working with me. And even at the end, though, Pete, one of the things I remember the doctor said, is like, hey, have you prayed? They would ask me all the time, have you prayed for your ex-wife? And I just did, no, ignored it. And finally, I got so pissed off. I told them, yeah, I prayed. They're like, you prayed? And I said, yes. I prayed that the bus would hit her and be quick. And they laughed because they knew my sense of humor,
Yeah.
And they said, well, I guess it's a start. But what they said to me, aside from that, they looked at me in the eyes, and I didn't fully understand this then, I would later, is that they're like, Rob, it's about the only thing we really worry about with you is the resentments. You don't understand, if you can't work through that, how much in danger of your own sobriety, of losing that you are.
Yeah.
And they were right. And I was so lucky, I got to the point when I was in Charlotte, 3 years sober, and I was sort of lost. And I'm like, man.
So after you go, I want to back up a little bit. So you go to rehab in Greensboro, and then do you go to the extended care place?
Yeah, well, that was all part of treatment. So we were still under that. And then after I was released, discharged from Fellowship Hall, I went to a sober living, or, back then halfway house, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
And I was not happy about that shit either,
So after you did 90 days in Fellowship Hall, you went to a sober living?
Yep, I went to sober living, and it was okay.
Yeah.
It was there in Greensboro, but this time I was going to do what they told me to do. It was $100 a week. It was something that I could afford, and I started, like picking up the pieces. I still had the support of where I went to treatment, the people I was around, the meetings and stuff.
So what's happening for you, by the way, like during all that?
What's that?
What's happening like for you? Like, you're going to meetings. Is everything changing for you?
Slowly. The biggest change that I remember, that accepting where I could start working with that shame and guilt, was that this is a disease. And the things that I said or did didn't really have an explanation. It's just part of the disease. My mind clicked with that. I could accept it and take away some of the guilt and shame, and then start working through the rest of it. So that started to help. I didn't really connect well with a lot of, it was a small town, and it could have just been me, but I didn't feel them very friendly and warm. I didn't need a red carpet rolled out, but I found some of them were just a bunch of, sober old assholes. And I'm like, I'm going to have to keep finding my way. And it was extremely difficult to find any kind of employment because of Google. And I had to start, looking at alternatives, looking at things to do. How am I going to survive? And, that's the fear of financial insecurity, everything that we deal with that, I had to start going through. But I was in a safer environment. At least I was familiar with some people there,
Yeah. And so you ended up in Charlotte, and I'm sorry, I'm too interested here. I keep jumping in and cutting you off. So you end up in Charlotte.
No, I'm fine.
Yeah. And you're in Charlotte. And did you work for the Charlotte Knights?
I did. And that was so in Greensboro. I worked for the Greensboro Grasshoppers. I ran a camera on the field. I got paid $40 a game. That was one source of revenue. And then somebody had introduced me to a casting director who did extra background work, and I worked on a bunch of shows in Wilmington, made some money that way. And I was finding other jobs. And finally, like my real job that I had was corporate sponsorship sales for the Charlotte Knights, right next to the where the Hornets play.
Yeah, so were they in Fort Mill still when you were there?
They had just so that stadium would have been a year old. I was there in the second season.
Oh, that's cool. So you got to the brand new place downtown in Charlotte.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're going to get a job in minor league baseball, at a stadium that seats 10,000 or 12,000, that's constantly ranked number one in the heart of uptown in Charlotte.
Yeah.
That's a dream come true, man.
Yeah, man, that stadium is unreal. So you're there working there, but you're still kind of not getting. And you said, by the way, earlier, just to go back, you said you realized something when you were in Charlotte. What was it that you realized?
Well, at that point, I was 3 years sober, and I was so thankful. They were good people to give me this opportunity. And it's a funny story. The first team meeting that we had, it was my first day there. And the GM and my boss, they called me in after this meeting. They introduced me, and I'm like, holy shit, I'm going to be fired. I can't believe they know something. They closed the door, and I'm like, it's going to be less than 12 hours. And I'll never forget, Scott, he's a good guy. And they sat down, they said, Rob, we know all about what you've been through. And we know there's two sides, and we want to be here and supportive of you. And it's okay with us, and that you're going to fit in great here in minor league baseball. And I was like, what a nice thing to say, only to realize later that everybody loves to drink in minor league baseball. Everybody is an alcoholic practically in minor league baseball, partying, having a great time. That night, it was the team's Christmas party, and one of the bosses came up and said, I just got to be honest, too. We are really honest and great to have you here, but I love your ex-wife. She's one of my favorites, and I laughed about it, Pete, and I laughed. And I'll never forget it was a humbling experience. They taught me so much. I've always loved baseball. I wanted an experience like this, but don't forget, when I did corporate sponsorship sales, I handed out the programs at the start of a game.
Oh, yeah.
I pulled the tarp. I ran the damn races dressed, as the hot dog or whatever it was, 40 some odd years old. And, we'd all be laughing. It was brutal.
Yeah.
And
that's my story too. I ended up working at a KFC, just waiting for those long drive-through lines. Oh God, they just lasted forever in those cold Baltimore evenings. I was like, this is never going to end. But you're doing your thing. You're sober. You're in Charlotte. It's 3.5 years. Are you getting to meetings at all? You said when you were you weren't. Okay, so you're kind of like a dry drunk when you're in North Carolina.
I think I was grateful. I was learning different things. I was frustrated.
Well, don't let me put words in your mouth. If you weren't a dry drunk, you weren't a dry drunk, but you weren't going to AA meetings.
No, I wasn't going to AA meetings, and I didn't really push in that town, for it. Sometimes I wish I had more, but then I guess everything happens for a reason.
Sure.
I realized as the season, was going on, and there were some really challenging, situations happening at that time with the Knights. And
what was the biggest challenge you had there?
Oh, the biggest challenge was I was okay with Thirsty Thursdays, right?
Yeah.
Working in the ballpark, walking around when we have games, but we had a boss that was an active alcoholic, and he was verbally abusive, and I felt the guilt and shame to fully understand what Christy would go through with me.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I went to bed one night, man, and I was like, this is probably when you want to talk about having a spiritual awakening. I went to bed and I would pray, and I'm a spiritual person, not a religious person, but I went and I said, "Hey, God, you see what's going on here? This is a fucking, excuse my French, shit show. And if this is where I'm supposed to be, then this is where I'm supposed to be. I'll trust you. If not, then get me the hell out of here." And I'm not kidding you. Within 3 to 4 days, I had a phone call from Los Angeles, from Hollywood, and it was a director and a casting director that was interested in my story. They wanted the story, but they wanted to then provide me, in exchange for that, the world's best life coaches to help me get my life back on track.
For like a reality show?
It was a documentary feature film.
Okay.
And they would give me the world's best life coaches to do whatever I, really wanted to do. And at that point in time, I had been trying to get into a job and work in treatment. And I thought about it, and I thought about it. I mean, it meant, everything. And then I made the mistake of saying to them, I think, was like, well, maybe I'd move out there. And they're like, in this business, raise stakes, bigger stakes you have, bigger story. And they're like, yeah, why don't you move out here? That's what we want. And I'm like, you want me to move 2,000 miles away with no job, shoot a movie with a bunch of coaches who I do respect and I know their names, and you'll put me up for 2 months in Santa Monica and I have no job.
And I'm guessing you said yes, right?
I did. You know what it was? It was the final night of a tarp pull after like 5 times.
A tarp pull, like, well, okay, so it was like rain delays?
Rain delays, pulling the tarp on, pulling it off. I went back to my desk, I lifted up the blotter, pulled out the contract, signed that damn thing, faxed it over there, sold all of my 1977 Star Wars Kenner action toys, sold my Emmy Awards.
You sold your Emmy Awards. For how much did you sell them for?
$4,000. One went for $4,000. I think the other went for $3,000.
Who? So you get $7,000 out of those.
Well, yeah, the one I sold earlier, but I think I came out here with about $5,000 to $6,000 is all I had.
Wow. So you move out there, and what happens? I guess you kind of had the acting bug. I guess you caught it when you were in Wilmington. I mean, there's a ton of production down there.
Absolutely, but remember and you wouldn't know this, but the reason the deal that I had cut with the producers and everything is that I want to work in addiction recovery. I didn't want to do anything more with news. I didn't want to do anything other than that. I enjoyed working on the sets as a production assistant, standby, or a stand-in, whatever. That was fine. It did its thing. But my goal was to come out here and work in addiction and recovery, work in a treatment center. And so as soon as I got out here, I started meeting with these great coaches, John DeMartini. The film is called Leap, and it's out. It's on Amazon.
Leap. Okay.
Yeah, it's I'll shoot you the link or something too. But it shows this journey in which
please do.
When I get out here, I go as far as the roads will take me, right? We're still running 3 years sober. I'm still running, trying to find that purpose and passion that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
I think it's addiction recovery. I get out here, I'm thinking these coaches are going to help me, like, work on my resume, work on these things, whatever. Then all of a sudden they start talking bullshit like treatment was. They're like, your problem is you can't forgive your ex-wife. Your problem is you can't deal with the guilt and shame. You've got to love yourself. And I'm like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
This is treatment. And now I'm like, oh my God, I quit a job. I've got little money. It's the end of Route 66. I'm in Santa Monica. You're here. So I had to start the film shows, and the film shows a process of what you have to do to overcome those things. And it taught me the gratitude, and it made me see that, Christy helped save my life. She gave me a choice. And that choice was whether I stand on the sidewalk in Milwaukee and continue down that road or change my life.
Well, it's funny too. You mentioned, well, exactly. You mentioned you're 3.5 years, maybe around 4 years sober when all this is going on and you're shooting this. And it sounds like ultimately it was a positive experience, but it brings you to that revelation. It doesn't happen overnight.
Well, no, and it's the catalyst. I actually celebrated 3 years on the set out here, and it was the catalyst because as soon as I started working through these things, doing it, I get this job in treatment. I start working because I had a mutual friend. I met him over in Hollywood Boulevard. We were talking about it, and he's like, we had worked in news business in Fort Myers, and I'm like, I'm really trying to get into treatment. I'm doing all this stuff. I'm doing this film, and I said, I like this guy Bob Forrest, and he's got a treatment. He goes, Bob Forrest, is this
Bob and the Monster, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Acacia, and I said, yeah, and he's like, I got a friend who works there, so he puts me in touch with this. Before I know it, I'm out there meeting them. They're taking me around this place, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's in Malibu. They're taking me around. I love Bob's music. I met with Bob. I sat down and talked. Everything was aligning, and I ended up working there for 6-7 months.
Oh, that's unbelievable.
And that really was a catalyst, Pete, that helped me find that empathy for others, the gratitude, meeting some of, my closest friends that are still here today, losing some along the way too. But that's originally why I came out here, and then, I took another job at a different place, and that didn't go so well. There's a lot of problems in the treatment business. And,
yeah, there are, and you don't have to dig too deep to read about them. Especially, that's from what I gather. Yes, from what I gather, the recovery community. My brother Kevin lives in Hermosa, and he's a sober guy, and we've been to the Alano house down by in Hermosa. It's awesome. Anyways, the recovery out there, from what I've experienced, and you live it, is awesome. But there's an underbelly because you're talking about vulnerable people who will maybe spend a lot of money to get friends, children, whoever sober, and you've got vulnerable subjects who you're dealing with all the time as far as the patients are concerned. So it doesn't shock me to hear you say that. I mean, it's out there.
No, and being this investigative guy, I'm like, I went for a non-for-profit. And I'm like, oh my God, I made a mistake. And I challenged him on a place. I was fired, and it sent me into like this tizzy of like, what do you do now? I mean, it
triggers all kinds of old stuff, probably, right?
Well, it triggered old stuff, the fear of financial insecurity. I'm 2,000 miles away from family. I have very little money. How am I going to survive? But it's this beautiful journey of like, I'm working a program. I'm learning others. He's a good friend when he's sober. Andy Dick is a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And I know it's as bizarre as it comes.
So he's kind of like in and out, right?
Oh, he's always in and out. But the Andy I met was 2.5 years sober, and Andy and I were hanging out. We were talking. He was the first person when I got fired and I was shitting my pants. He was the first person to come up to me and give me a hug and say, "I'm sorry. I know that's why you came out here, man. Are you okay?"
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know, but I got an audition tomorrow. Now it's real. And he goes, yeah, it is. You got to put food on the table. You want me to help you? And I said, yeah, if you can. And he started teaching me things, and we spent time together. And that's the Andy that I know. And then I, within a year or so, it was very difficult to watch the Andy that I didn't know go back out and, go back into active addiction.
Yeah, that's our life, right? I mean, in recovery, by the grace of God, it's not me or you. It could be if we don't work it hard enough. That's what it brings up in me. I get scared when I see somebody go out. It's like, and that's why you go to meetings, right? Because you see it, you have a front row seat to this, and it's like, oh my gosh, like I do not want that to be me because I know how that story ends.
The newcomer, and that is just recently has been a reminder. And I ran into Andy recently, and it was sad. And it was off of Hollywood Boulevard. I was over at the Hotel Roosevelt shooting something, and at the end we hugged, and I had to fight back tears because I wasn't sure I'd see him alive again. And that's the disease. Whether it's Andy Dick, your brother, your sister, your girlfriend, or whatever, it was just that friendship that we had. And now I'm actually on the other side of it, right?
Yeah.
Like Al-Anon thing. It's so weird that you're on this other side of seeing these things. But so that was the catalyst that changed everything out here for me. So I'm like, well, I didn't have interest in TV news anymore. I didn't have those things, and I had to start finding my way. So I immediately went down to Central Casting, registered. I'm like, shit, this sucks because background work is not easy. It's not glamorous.
Background work is just you're in the background. I mean, it is what it says, right?
It is what it is.
Yeah.
There's different levels. There's different things, and there's a lot of fun, but you get a meal, you get a haircut. Sometimes, depending on what you're working on.
Craft services.
You crafty. Yeah, you got craft services, good catering. You meet people, and you hope that I just had to get money coming in, and then I found a fellow actor had told me about medical studies. So I'm like, what's that? And he's like, well, you test non-FDA approved drugs. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't. He goes, it pays thousands. I go, really? I didn't believe it. I called the number he told me to call, went in there for a physical. They paid me $100 for that. The irony, all my vitals are great. They're like, we want to bring you into the study. So after spending 5 days in this lab and taking the non-FDA approved drugs, they paid me $5,000.
So what kind of drugs are you taking?
Well, I mean, these are like for cancer treatment, Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
All things now, you don't have to have those, but what these medical studies focus on is how does it break down in your body? Is it safe? What is the half-life? That's what they're looking for, and they need somebody who's healthy.
Yeah.
So that became another source of income. Well, I kept
are we talking about any controlled substances here, Rob? I got to get that out there.
No.
Okay.
No.
Right.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
These are all, you're dealing with Pfizer, you're dealing with Merck, you're dealing with all these kind of things. And that was always a concern of mine, is that I want to make sure that we're not, because there are, studies where you could dance in those.
Yeah.
But there's an extensive screening part of that.
Well, you notice the addict, that's all I think about, right? Yeah. That's where I go right away, dude. Yeah.
Yeah, the shots, the pills, and everything that they're giving you, the IVs, however they, give the dosage. It wasn't an ideal thing, but it allowed me to keep living while I was trying to find a job producing. And I got a job producing for a Facebook watch show, Inside the Madness of Kentucky Basketball. And what that was is it was awesome. I mean, we followed the team for the year.
Oh, that's that is awesome.
Yeah, and I started a career in Hollywood. And, it's a weird job because you work for like 5 months during the production, you wrap. And my friends all knew other people, so they got onto other shows. I didn't. So, I had to find another way to keep fighting it. And I went out and auditioned with 600 people to become a Universal Studios tour guide. And so I got picked. I had to go through 3 weeks of training, go through all this stuff. It was hell, but it was also became a job.
What is that? What is that like? You show up to the lot every day and you just cruise right in there? Back to like those bungalows?
Yeah. Well, you of course you've been out here in the bungalows. The bungalows.
I've heard about them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny, Keith. You'll have to come out and take my tour. The training, it's a union job. It's based on seniority, so they have a big roster. And during the peak time, you're likely to get scheduled. Other than that, you got to call in for a shift, so it's not consistent. But here's the magic. You just said, I now have access to that back lot.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and there's opportunities that exist out there. Martha De Laurentiis, it's horrible. She just died of brain cancer.
Yeah.
But De Laurentiis company, they hired me to be an intern to learn how to do script coverage. They brought Hannibal to the big and small screen. They're working on a remake of Firestarter with Blumhouse. So I learned all these Hollywood things working in what used to be Alfred Hitchcock's bungalow.
Wow.
I mean, it was just amazing. And then through Universal and Practical Jokers, they came out and they cast me in one of their episodes playing a character. But Universal, as the studio head at one point in time, told us in the small meeting we got to meet with him, and he'd been the longest serving at the time. And he told me, he's like, you work at the world's largest movie studio. Use it.
Yeah.
And then he said, the other thing is, he said, go out there, find your way. And there's plenty of opportunities. And I've been, very fortunate to try to do that. But I mean, it is as eclectic as you would imagine. I mean, I'm out there. I worked for Warner Brothers, their Halloween Horror Night. I was a Conjuring maze expert. And that was a tough job. I only lasted like a week and a half. My anxiety was off the chart. I couldn't keep performing like that. And then I decided to go do Ford versus Ferrari and be background for that film instead. But, these opportunities in Universal has been a big part of my own childhood and loving that lot. This is where it comes full circle, and this is where it really becomes the beautiful journey. Now, this is very Hollywood journey, but this is just my journey.
Yeah.
And as a kid growing up out here, I always dreamed of the day I would pull into that lot and my name would be at the gate. The first time it was at the gate, it was for the Steve Harvey show. They had cast me to be a bachelor. And I was scared because I realized I hadn't really dated in my sobriety. So how is this going to play and everything? But when I went out there and you sat there and the woman asked the questions and Steve Harvey was there, I gave honest answers.
Well, you're
and
a bachelor. I mean, come on. It's a Steve Harvey show. This is real.
Yeah. Oh no, this is real. You can see it. You know, you can see the thing. And you talked about the beautiful part of recovery and something that hit home. It wasn't the fact that she picked me. It was the fact that the answers I gave were honest answers from my heart, you know, and you don't see all the answers. There was talk about, you know, really, do you have faith? And I said, no, I don't. I thought Steve Harvey's head was going to explode.
Yeah.
He's very, you know, and I said, and that was a big problem in my life. And he starts nodding. He's like, okay, this is okay. And then, but the audience at the end of the clip, you'll see she has to pick people and they go through, will it be 1, 2, or 3? And we're all sitting out there. You can see each other. And when the audience came to me, they went nuts. And it wasn't the fact that I was picked as much as the fact that I looked at myself and I can't fight back tears, is that I didn't look at myself as such a big piece of shit anymore.
Yeah, and you were honest.
You know, for once, these people saw I was a good person.
Yeah.
And it was, and that gave me the sense of like, maybe you're pretty hard on yourself. And that was my first time on the Universal Studios lot to do a show and to come back out there. And, you know, the first date, I mean, the irony, you know, is that they take us to the commissary. So this place that I loved as a kid has now become a very central part of my own recovery and my own, you know, rebirth of, you know, finding your way through all this stuff.
How was the dating, like when you started dating and stuff like that in sobriety?
You know, I went back to an old girlfriend a few times, you know, maybe like a couple years in, and that was not going to work. And it wasn't a good situation. I went back because she knew all the stuff. So
yeah,
the dating had been limited and still remains limited. And it's one reason I probably like, you know, the men's meetings. But it's something that's a reminder that, you know, I have to get out and navigate that more.
Yeah, I mean, and it is like, I remember talking to, just back to what you said, when I was in a halfway house, this woman, what was her name? Karen. She was awesome. She was our therapist. And, you know, those people, it's such volatile in those houses. You know, you could have a therapist there for like 3 weeks and then she's gone. But this one was there the whole time. And I remember asking her, you know, I was talking to her about like my ex-girlfriend and how I wanted to get back together with her. And, you know, and she's telling me how that isn't right. And I said, why do people want to get back together with their exes? And she said, because it's easy.
Yeah.
You know, and it really is. I mean, going out and meeting a new person and putting yourself out there, it's just like you said, somebody that knows all the stuff is safe, right? And there's something good about safe. But at the same time, there's something to be said for, in recovery, you know, recovery has allowed me the ability to do things that I used to have to get drunk to muster up the courage to do.
Oh, perfect.
Right? I mean, it's true. And that's, you know, it's like, and I still take the shortcuts and I still love the easy shit. Like, don't get me wrong, but I try not to. I strive to have courage. There was a woman on here last week, Jean, and she talked about just core values, you know, being honest, being kind, you know, being loyal. And that really hit me right between the eyes. I need to have more of those in my life, you know, just simple, just core values.
And simple, and I love that. And, you know, I tell sometimes the newcomers, you know, it's always easier to go back than it is to go forward, even though you know it's wrong.
Yeah.
Because it's what we're used to. It's what feels comfortable, even though it's wrong.
What are some of the things you're doing in recovery today? Just
you know,
to give yourself that freedom.
You know, to keep myself sane and to keep working toward, you know, I found a strong support group. It's gotten even stronger during the COVID time. We do a lot of Zoom meetings, but believe it or not, it's a men's group that we meet at a bar at 7:15 in the morning. And yeah, only in Hollywood, man. And these guys have all become so close to me and so supportive and help, you know, each other. And that's huge. You know, I work through, you know, trying to find time better to meditate. My schedule gets crazy between auditions and balancing this because it's a different life for me. So gig work, you know, there'll be days, you know, yesterday I had a fitting for a big TV show. I got an audition waiting to do for today. then, for the next 4 days, I'll have probably nothing. So I need to be mindful of that and, take care of myself, self-care.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, how is the acting career going? What is that like to walk in there and audition? I mean, you walk in, break that down. Like, what's that look like?
It is so freaking bizarre, and okay, I'll give you talk about the struggles, and I hear a lot of other actors saying this, is that my biggest one was the anxiety, okay? And I didn't have that for so many years in news. I'd be anxious to get to the meeting or do whatever, not necessarily anxious for a live shot or to anchor, but there were so many times I couldn't go into the room to audition. So I just set a goal for myself. I'm like, if you can just go in and audition, then shit, you won, whether you get it or not, whether you book that role or not. And once I started doing that, I started booking roles. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, this can actually work. So, but it's so different. Here's your environment, So I had a commercial audition the other day. My agent set that up. This was in person, and the casting director will probably see on that day alone between 58 to 60 people. You go into these nondescript buildings here in Los Angeles. There's people that sign in on a list. You sit on a bench. They come out and get you. You're done in about 4 minutes.
Okay.
In each room, there's like 15 different rooms in there. Each is a different project.
And you go in there, and how long do you wait outside?
Oh, they're pretty good.
Okay.
If they're backed up, they'd be waiting, sometimes, too long, 45 minutes or whatever, they get backed up. And then, that's just the first part. So then I get a, what do you call it? I get a
callback.
Want to do Zoom. So it becomes the Hollywood, hustle or the shuffle.
Hollywood shuffle. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you end up doing the Price is Right. I needed a new car. I didn't get the car, but I got a new Apple Book Mac Air with all for documentary on. I could walk up there and do it. I gave it my shot.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the strange things that I look back now and I try to remind myself. I'm a SAG-AFTRA actor now. I got my SAG card by being a photo double. The last two the vouchers I needed came in for Adam Ruins Everything. Adam Conover, the comedian for his TV show. Put the whole thing. That's how I got that. And then Scandal, I was one of the people they put their face on the board, and that gave me my third voucher to do.
How active are you? Like, where can we see you at? Any stuff coming out? I know Leap is something. We'll link that to this podcast. I want people to be able to take a look at that.
Yeah, one that deals strictly with is Chasing Evil. You're not as old as me, but
Robbie Knievel.
Yeah, Robbie Knievel, and that. We were talking about Palestine, or we were texting, and that is a story about him getting sober and the days of us partying and what he went through with Evil. I think I'll send you a link. It may not still be on.
So you used to party with him? Where was this? In California?
Yeah, I covered all of the Fox stunt shows. So back in the day when it started with Shattering the Records in Vegas, then we went to the Grand Canyon. Then we went to Palestine, Texas Jump. We did the rooftops. I covered all of those stunt shows for the Fox stations and my Fox station as well too. So Robbie and I, we all partied. We all, did all the same things. And then I imploded, and then he started getting sober. And the film deals with his sober jump in Palm Springs and his story of what it is. And I sort of sit in as the person that talks about the challenges he'll face along, the lines of, recovery.
Did his dad have addiction problems too?
Huge.
Oh,
huge.
really?
All untreated, and, his mom says in the documentary, they didn't call him evil because he was nuts.
Yeah.
It's a sad story. Listen, I'll tell you this. It's a sad story. And it's also a story that shines some light on addiction, but even the director, he was talking to me, and he's a great guy, and he's done one on Richard Pryor, so it's dealt with addiction as well too. But he's like, well, Robbie, he doesn't have anything besides jumping. What do you expect him to do? Flip burgers? And I said, yeah. Whatever it takes, Jesse.
Yeah.
Whatever it takes. And people don't get that, Pete. And that's why, like, when I talk about these Hollywood things, the people I've met, the sets that I go on, this incredible life that I lead, that I, pitch a TV show on Road to Recovery. I go into those bungalows, right? And now I'm sitting there against the executive producers and the networks pitching something that's dear to my heart as I watch a Universal Studios tour tram go by, knowing that in 3 hours I got to jump on one of those and do my tour.
Yeah.
That's the wild, different life that I've had to adjust to and give myself, a little bit credit for saying, hey, you dove into something that's entirely different, a gig economy, something you don't know, as well. And a lot of people have helped along the way. When I was living in my car for a few days, trying to get Daniel Baldwin to help me do a show that I was pitching, he said yes to that, but he said, why are you living in your car? And I don't know Daniel well. He's like, here's some advice. You're a grown-ass man. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but if we're in our recovery, we don't live in our cars. He said, ask for help. And then he found me a place to live for the next 16 months.
Wow.
And I don't know him very well, and I'm very grateful, for that. It's not because it's Daniel Baldwin. It's all those people that have helped us. And I'm sure, Pete, you could rattle them off too.
Oh my God. So many people put their hands out there for me. And so that's our job today, right? Is to be available. The last thing I'll ask you, well, I guess two more things. What do you tell somebody that comes around that's just trying to get a day, a young guy or an old guy, somebody that's a newcomer? What do you tell them?
Hold on. I mean, and keep, it's so cliche. Keep coming back, but just give it a shot. Give it a chance. Because what you're doing right now isn't working. And what's so wrong with this?
Yeah.
But you have to connect, and I think that takes time. And I think that a lot of us are coming in with so many different stories of, I don't like saying broken, but just that we're struggling, And I also tell them, it's a great Brad Pitt quote that he said to Anthony Hopkins when Anthony Hopkins was interviewing with is, I remind people of this. It applies to my life. We've always placed great importance on the mistake. But the next move, what you do after the mistake, is what really defines a person. We're all going to make mistakes, but what is the next step? And, as a culture, we don't seem to stick around and see what the next step is. That's what interests me. Yeah. And I think that he nailed it. But you got to stick around.
Yeah, you have to stick around. Now, where can we find you as far as, social media platforms, if people want to see your stuff, get in touch, how can they find you?
It's Rob. I don't do a whole lot of it. It's Rob Koebel Instagram. It's _ Koebel. There's my webpage is my name, Rob, KOEBEL.com. And there's a true crime podcast on there that I've been working on too. And you'll find the same on Twitter and Facebook.
You're the man, Rob. So you got an audition today?
I do have an audition today. I had a really cool fitting yesterday, and in a couple weeks, I have a new dance show that I'm helping the producers sort of get together and see how that's going to work.
And so what's the audition today? Can you say?
It's just commercial. It wouldn't be anything you guys know. But again, commercial, a lot of people are like,
commercials pay the bills, dude.
Pete, okay, so you know it all, man. You know it all. And I have plenty of friends that do the episodics, that do the features, but it's those commercials. So, $25,000 commercial is going to help me, survive in Los Angeles. Yeah.
Well, good luck today, man. And, we'll be in touch. We'll keep in touch. This is going to be up tomorrow, so I'll send you a link. Yeah, send me a link for Leap and for the Knievel movie too, and I'll put them on here.
So much for everything that you're doing to get the word out there, and congratulations on an incredible journey, man. You are fighting it. You're going after your passion, and I know it ain't easy, but you've been very inspiring.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate the time, man. I really do.
Hang in there.
All right, buddy.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to The Payoff with Pete. Once again, I'm Pete Souza. And of course, we are part of the Rogue Media Network. All kinds of good podcasts you can find at roguemedianetwork.com. And of course, you can find this podcast and all those other ones wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, other spots like that.
This has been a Rogue Media podcast.